They took me to lunch to make it look respectable. White tablecloths, polished silverware. The kind of place you fire someone when you still want to feel good about it. My name is Adam Tran. I'm 42 years old. For the past 9 years, I built the data backbone of a fintech company in Manhattan, a company that now decided I was no longer aligned with their vision. They called it a pivot. I called it what it was: betrayal wrapped in sea bass and Sauvignon Blanc. It happened on a Thursday, early spring. One of those mornings where the fog still clung to the streets, but the air hinted at something warmer. I should have known. Preston, our CEO, never asked me to lunch. I don't even think he knew where I sat. But that morning his assistant popped her head into my office. "Preston wants to take you to Maxwell's. 12:30 sharp." I glanced at my screen where a live dashboard of our AI trade model quietly pulsed. 12:30, sure. Maxwell's was 3 blocks from the office. I'd passed it dozens of times but never stepped inside. Too refined, too performative. This was where partners toasted IPOs. Not where people like me engineers talked about real things like data hygiene or neural drift. Still I went. Pressed shirt, no tie. Calm face. I'd been feeling something in the air for weeks anyway. Preston was already seated when I arrived. Perfect posture, rolled cuffs. Beside him sat someone new, a young guy in his late 20s, probably early 30s. Fresh-cut hair, nervous smile. He didn't stand when I approached. Preston gestured to the chair across. "Adam," he said warmly, "thanks for making time." I nodded. Sat. Didn't order anything. I wasn't here for the food. "This is my nephew Taylor," he added casually. "Just finished his master's at Stanford. Top of his class in AI strategy and applied optimization." I looked at Taylor. He blinked twice, smiled like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to. I already knew. They weren't here to thank me. They were here to transition me. The conversation moved fast. Preston cut into his salmon like this was a quarterly review. "You've been instrumental in building our AI model," he said. "But we feel it's time for new perspectives. The industry's evolving. Translation: you're expensive. You're not shiny anymore. And Taylor here, he costs half and calls me uncle." I didn't argue, didn't blink. "Of course," I said simply, "these things happen." Preston looked relieved. He thought I'd push back. Maybe threaten to leave bugs in the code. Instead, I sipped water and waited. "You'll have 6 weeks," he added. "We'd love your help with the transition." He slid an NDA across the table, already printed, already signed by legal. I picked it up, flipped through. No surprises. I signed it just before the creme brulee arrived. "Thank you, Adam," he said, standing to shake my hand. Taylor did too. A beat late, I walked back to the office slower than usual. Not because I was shocked, because I wasn't. Back at my desk, my admin access had already been downgraded. Name removed from the engineering Slack channel. I was no longer listed in the leadership team directory. They'd made the decision weeks ago. The lunch was just theater. I sat in silence, opened my terminal, typed a simple line of code, a check. One I'd built for moments exactly like this. Result core system running. Root signature active. Auth token Adam T valid. I closed the window. "There's something you should know about what we built, about what I built. The AI engine our company runs on. The one we pitch to investors as self-learning, adaptive, and autonomous. It's not autonomous. Not really. Not without a key. And I never gave them that key. Not fully. Not without my final signature. Not without my token. It wasn't malice. It was insurance." Back when we were still a 6-person dev team and no one wanted to pay for third-party license management, I designed a signing system. Custom. Offline. Encrypted. Every version of the AI model required my cryptographic confirmation to go live. They called it elegant, said it made us lean. Preston even joked once, "We'd be screwed if you ever left." I smiled then, just like I'm smiling now, because I did leave, and they are. I didn't go home after work. I walked. Past Bryant Park, down 6th. Listened to the city buzz like it always had. No one knew that across Midtown an AI engine sat idle firing on limited protocols waiting for a signature that wouldn't come. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. Just clear. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest. Because what happened next, they never saw it coming. And I never raised my voice. Most people think code is cold, that it's just math and syntax and logic stacked on logic. But for me, the system had a heartbeat. Not a metaphor. A real one. I built the core engine of our firm's AI, not as a product, but as something alive. Something with structure, rhythm, and fail-safes woven into its bones. And it didn't breathe unless I told it to. That part no one else ever noticed. It started as a patch. 3 years ago, we hit a compliance snag when a trade simulation was deployed early. We needed a way to delay live execution until certain validations were complete. Legal panicked. Investors started asking about governance. So I offered a solution, a soft-gated authorization system. Simple enough on paper. Each model version required a final digital signature before going live. But the signature wasn't just a password. It was cryptographic, time-bound, linked to my offline key. Not a company-wide key, not a shared credential stored in some cloud vault. Mine, my laptop, my secure token. Back then, no one saw it as a risk. We were small, scrappy. Preston said, "It's brilliant, Adam. Makes us lean, secure." We skipped paying for a commercial license manager, saved hundreds of thousands over the years. And in exchange, they gave me complete trust. No audits, no second signer, just me and that heartbeat. Most weeks, no one even noticed it ticking. Our AI model would go through daily cycles, training, testing, simulation, limited deployments. Everything seemed automatic, but behind the curtain, I was confirming each version, watching each build, reading the logs like a physician reads charts, looking for anomalies no one else knew to look for. There were times when I held back a release, quietly, a bad regression, a drift in weight mapping, or just a feeling, something the model wasn't telling us clearly. I never made a scene, just pulled it, waited a day, watched again. No one ever asked why the system skipped a beat now and then. I think they assumed it was just noise. It wasn't. The funny thing is, back then, I wasn't guarding anything. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't preparing for betrayal. I was just doing my job. I took pride in the code. Not in what it made, but how it made it. We weren't running a casino. We were building something that mattered. Or at least, I thought we were. Then the board got involved. Then funding scaled. Then meetings got longer and explanations got shorter. And then Taylor arrived. He showed up on a Monday, pressed suit, new badge, big grin like someone had told him he was about to change the game. He came over to my desk after his onboarding tour. Said, "Uncle Preston says you've been holding this place together. I'm here to learn everything." I smiled, nodded, offered him a spare monitor. That was week 1. By week 2, he had opinions. By week 3, he had suggestions. And by week 4, he asked me if we could remove the manual signature layer. I paused, looked him in the eye. "No," I said. "That layer prevents unauthorized releases." He shrugged, said something like, "It just feels old school." I didn't answer. Just went back to my terminal. Some things don't need defending. 6 weeks. That's what Preston gave me. 6 weeks to transition everything to Taylor. But there were things I couldn't transition. Not because I was petty, because no one asked how it worked in the first place. The model didn't just run on data. It ran on logic chains I had built from scratch. Code that interpreted market volatility through layered abstractions. A web of custom signal weighting. And that signature layer buried so deep you couldn't yank it out without cutting the model's spine. I started transferring what I could. Documentation, log archives, training data backups, superficial configs, the things that made it look like the core. But not the heartbeat, not the part that made it breathe. And Taylor. He didn't know what to ask for. He was more focused on rebranding, new dashboards, sleek presentations, color-coded projections for Q3. I let him run with it. Late one night, I stayed in the office after most had gone home. Just me and the hum of the server racks. I typed one command, a diagnostic check I'd built for moments like this. The screen flickered. Then, System Status Model Shell, Active Core Engine, Standby Signature Required, Atom T Valid Expiration, 23 days. I stared at that line, that countdown. 23 days. After that, the core would go dark. Unless signed. Unless I authorized it. No one knew this timer existed. It was a failsafe I'd added years ago to prevent unauthorized use in case I ever left, or worse. They wanted to remove me from the story. Fine. But they forgot I was the one who wrote the ending. I logged out, closed the terminal, turned off the lights behind me. As I stepped into the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the chrome panel. Calm, clear, unbothered. Let them run their timelines. Let them present to investors. The system still beat, but only because I was still listening. The handover was never about knowledge. It was about optics, about showing the board a clean break, about giving Taylor a story he could tell investors. 6 weeks to move everything I knew. 12 years of design intuition, edge case handling, converted into bullet points and folder structures. That's not how systems work. That's not how I work. But I showed up every morning right on time. Taylor was eager. Eager in that way only people who've never been burned can be. He believed speed was mastery. That enthusiasm could replace understanding. I've already reviewed the architecture, he said on day 2. I think we can trim some legacy logic. Legacy, that word. I nodded slowly. Pointed to the modules he was referencing. Suggested he hold off removing anything until he'd seen them in action. He didn't take the advice. We set up joint working sessions, 1 hour a day, more for their benefit than mine. I walked him through surface-level workflows, how the training data passed through the transformation pipeline, how the model segmented volatility windows, how prediction scores were reconciled with portfolio risk. Taylor took notes. Well, he typed, fast, too fast to absorb. Where's the model trigger script, he asked one afternoon. I paused. That script. The one that connects the prediction module to the execution layer. I'd never saved it in the shared repo. It's part of the final deployment step, I said. Runs after signature validation. He looked confused, then frustrated, then smiled. Ah, yeah. That extra layer you mentioned. Each week they took something else off my plate. Client demo prep, model calibration, release notes. Bit by bit they closed the circle around me. But they didn't know what was still in my hands. The core engine hadn't been updated in 4 days, then 6, then 10. I wasn't blocking it, I just stopped signing new builds. Let the system drift toward expiration, quietly. No alerts, no warnings, just silence hiding in plain sight. Sometimes I caught Taylor watching me. Not out of respect, more like suspicion. Like he could sense I wasn't resisting, but also wasn't fully cooperating. He started copying over old directories, rewriting docs, renaming files as if that made them new. Streamlining, he called it. But he didn't realize the dependencies those files had, or the layers I'd buried beneath them. You can copy a tree, but if you don't transplant the roots, it dies. By week 4, he was in charge of the team. People stopped CCing me on engineering emails, stopped asking questions. Some avoided eye contact. Not out of malice, just survival. I understood. Tech companies shed skins quickly. One day you're critical, the next you're legacy code. At home I started writing again. Not code, just thoughts. I opened a blank notebook and titled the first page, Things They Will Learn Too Late. Each night I added a line. Don't delete the old pipeline logs. They're cross-referenced in the audit layer. Don't mess with the threshold tuning, it's manually adjusted for high volatility Mondays. Stop assuming the data is clean. It never is. I wasn't documenting for revenge. I was documenting for myself. To remember what I'd built, what they didn't bother to learn. On the Friday of week 5, Taylor came to my desk. No appointment. Just dropped by like he ran the place. "You've been quiet," he said. I looked up from my screen. "I've been working," I replied. He smiled. "Yeah. No, it's good. Just wanted to check if you had time to go over the deployment chain." I paused, clicked my screen off, leaned back. "Sure," I said. "Let's go through it." I walked him through the surface flow again, step by step. Where the triggers live, what validates, what doesn't. He nodded too much, asked questions too early, interrupted the answers with his own assumptions. But I kept my tone even, never rushed, never corrected with force. Let him feel like he was leading. Let him take ownership of what he didn't understand. "Wait," he said at one point. "So the signature layer doesn't auto-renew?" I shook my head slowly. "No, it expires every 30 days, by design." He frowned. "Why?" I looked him in the eye. "Because models drift. Because risk isn't just in markets. It's in people." He didn't respond, just nodded, then looked down at his laptop. "Good to know," he mumbled. By the last week, I stopped pretending. No more check-ins, no more fake enthusiasm. I did what was required, signed what wouldn't matter, watched the system pulse slower each day. The model was still technically online. But without renewal, the core would freeze, just a matter of time, and no one had asked for the key. On my final day, I cleared my desk quietly, took the notebook with me, left behind my monitor chair cushion ceramic mug. Taylor didn't say goodbye, neither did Preston. As I walked toward the elevator, I looked back once. The floor buzzed with energy, new faces, louder voices, faster footsteps. But the heartbeat, it was gone. And they didn't know it yet. It started small. A delayed response time, a skipped data pull, a timestamp that didn't match the logs. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to make someone squint. I watched it from a distance, not actively, just out of habit, like checking in on an old house you used to live in. You don't go inside. You just make sure the lights still turn on. Taylor didn't notice it at first. He was busy. There were pitch decks to polish, investor calls, a roadmap meeting about Q4 product alignment, the AI engine. It was still running, at least on the surface. Underneath, something had changed. It wasn't failing. Not yet, but it wasn't learning either. The model had stopped evolving. No new parameter sweeps, no adaptive corrections. It was recycling logic from 2 weeks ago, quietly, blindly, like a heart that kept beating, but had stopped listening to the body. I knew it would happen. That's why I built the expiration logic. 30 days without a verified signature. Then it locks. Hard. No new training, no external API calls, no real-time simulations. Just cache cycles in a loop. A ghost of its former self, still breathing but not alive. They still used it. I saw the press release. Next-gen adaptive trading model in full deployment. Taylor was quoted. So was Preston. They used words like revolutionary, scalable, edge-based inference. But I knew the truth. The system hadn't updated in 12 days. Then 15. Then 19. The model heartbeat had slowed. Each cycle a little colder. A little more out of sync. And no one knew why. I got a message from Marcus, one of the junior engineers I'd mentored. He wasn't supposed to reach out. But the subject line said, "Quick question off the record." The body was short. "Hey, random Q, any idea why the prediction engine is throwing stale output every 4th run? Taylor thinks it's a logging error, but it's too clean, too consistent." I didn't respond, not directly, but I opened the system diagnostic again, just to see. System check core engine, standby last signature, Atom T. Elapsed time 23 days. Model drift high status degraded loop mode. I sat back, let the silence fill the room. It was doing exactly what I designed it to do. When trust breaks, the system holds its breath. That week, Taylor launched a live demo. A big one. Top-tier investment firm. Heavy capital potential. They were supposed to see the model's predictive power on real-time test data. Live simulation. Market-aligned. What they got was noise. I heard about it 2 hours later. Another message. Different sender. No subject. Just, today was bad. Taylor blamed the network. Then the data feed. Then an unexpected caching conflict. He asked the dev team to roll back some patches. Then reindexed the model weights. None of it worked, because the model wasn't broken. It was dormant. It was waiting for a signature that would never come. They didn't know how deep it ran. The AI wasn't one script. It was layers, submodules, checksums embedded in execution trees. Taylor kept trying to rebuild on top of it. Kept thinking he could streamline the legacy code. Clean it up. He didn't realize every shortcut he took. Cut another artery. And no one was monitoring the pulse. I got coffee the next morning. Same cafe I used to stop at on the way to the office. The barista remembered me. Asked if I was on vacation. I said something like, yeah, sort of. I sat near the window. Watched people in suits move like clockwork down Lexington. Everyone has somewhere to be. Everyone has a deadline to meet. Until they don't. That afternoon, Taylor made a change. A big one. He pushed a full recompile of the model's shell. Deleted references to the old pipeline. Removed the signature layer manually. Hard-coded new logic over it. Called it fresh infrastructure. It compiled, but the output didn't make sense. Predictions came back in null clusters. Risk calculations returned 0. It wasn't failing, it just refused. You can't delete a lock by renaming it. You have to understand why it was there. Taylor didn't. Preston sent a company-wide email the next day. He framed it as optimization efforts in progress. Said some delays are expected as the model undergoes structural enhancements. In truth, they had no model, just a shell, a copy of a copy, looping until the loop broke. I didn't feel vindicated, just quiet. They weren't evil, just careless. They wanted speed, they wanted innovation. They forgot that systems aren't just code, they're memory. And this one it remembered who it listened to. That night I opened the notebook again. Wrote a single line. There's a difference between inheriting a machine and understanding what keeps it alive. Then I closed it and let the system sleep. I used to think failure came from chaos, something random, unexpected. But most of the time it's not chaos, it's choice. People dig their own holes, one confident step at a time. The day Taylor deleted my code, it didn't make a sound. No alert, no warning. Just a quiet commit in the system log, tagged with his name, time-stamped at 3:41 p.m. He thought he was cleaning house, removing old architecture, simplifying things. But what he removed wasn't bloat. It was the connective tissue. The invisible paths that let the model think across time. It took me years to get it right. He erased it in 12 minutes. That night, the model stopped completely. No error, no crash. Just silence, no output, no logs. It didn't die. It didn't panic. It just shut the door. They noticed fast this time. First came the Slack threads, then emails, then an emergency Zoom with the engineering leads. Taylor blamed legacy interference. Said something must have corrupted the build. He didn't mention the commit. Didn't mention what he'd overwritten. I watched the logs from home. Didn't need access. They were still public. Line after line, null return, signature missing, pipeline halt. The same heartbeat, now flatlined. 3 days passed. They tried everything. Rebuilt the data source mapping, reverted branches, redesigned trigger conditions. None of it worked, because they weren't fixing a bug. They were staring at a wall they had built themselves. And the key to open it wasn't in the building anymore. Marcus reached out again, this time just one sentence. Did you leave us a kill switch? I read it twice. No greeting, no accusation, just curiosity. I didn't reply. Not out of malice, but because the answer wasn't yes or no. I didn't leave a trap. I left a boundary. And they crossed it on their own. I still had the key, the offline token, not in use, not connected. The model was waiting for it, but no one had asked me. Not Taylor, not Preston, not the board. I wasn't fired with a conversation. I was replaced with a lunch, and they thought that was enough to rewrite the past. Friday afternoon I got a call. Not from Taylor, from Preston. I let it ring twice before answering. Adam, he said. His voice was tight. The way people sound when they're trying not to sound desperate. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I said nothing, just waited. He cleared his throat. We've hit a few bumps with the model. Seems like the last build didn't retain core functionality. A pause, then softer, could use your eyes on it. I let a second pass, then said, I'm not under contract. He hesitated. I know. I'm not asking for anything formal, just a quick look. As a favor. A favor. From the guy who handed me a severance envelope across duck confit. I didn't laugh, didn't hang up. Just asked, what did you change? There was a long silence. Then, Taylor tried to streamline things. Might have overwritten a few dependencies. I waited again, then replied, then it's working exactly as it should. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was quieter. So there's no way to recover it. I looked at the token. Still sitting in my drawer. Still active. There's a way, I said, but not the one you're hoping for. We ended the call with polite nothingness. No solutions. No drama. Just two people realizing a door had closed. And one of them had locked it from the inside. Later that night, I opened the notebook again. Wrote down a new line. Every system is a reflection of its maker. This one just happened to remember. Then I closed it, and let the weekend come. They thought I'd be hard to replace. Turns out I was impossible. Not because I was a genius, not because I wrote perfect code, but because I remembered the things they ignored. Little things, quiet things, the kind that don't show up on documentation or dashboards. After Preston called, things moved faster. They tried hiring outside consultants, big names, impressive bios, people who talked in acronyms and sounded confident on calls, but no one could explain why the model wouldn't respond, why it froze, why it drifted when it shouldn't and held when it should have moved. Because it wasn't a system problem, it was a trust problem. The core wasn't offline, it was waiting, still listening for a signal it had been trained to obey. Still searching for a signature it trusted. Mine. Marcus messaged me again. They brought in a firm from Boston, said they'll have a fix in 72 hours. I didn't reply, didn't need to. I knew they'd try to rewrite the entire engine, build something new, different. But different doesn't mean better. And what they had lost wasn't just code. It was understanding. It was intuition. It was 12 years of knowing where the edges were because I drew them. By week 3, things got worse. Investors started asking questions. Clients paused renewals. Performance metrics dipped. Taylor tried to compensate, adjusted parameters, pushed temporary patches. At one point, he tried to rebuild the prediction module using open-source code. It ran, but the trades it suggested were wrong, not just off, dangerous. A simulation flagged one as high risk within seconds. But the system failed to alert. The warning module had been linked to my signature chain. Now gone. That's when I got another call. Not Preston this time. Someone from the board. A woman named Meredith. Soft-spoken, polished. She started with compliments. Said I was highly respected. That I had built something extraordinary. And that the company was in a moment of transition. I let her talk. Waited until she asked what she really came to ask. We'd love to explore a short-term advisory role. A retainer. Flexible scope. You could work remote on your terms. It was tempting, for a second. Not because of the money. Because of the silence I heard in her voice. That quiet strain people carry when they've just realized they bet on the wrong horse. But I declined. Gently, clearly. I don't work for that company anymore. She paused. Then asked, would you consider it as a gesture of goodwill? That part made me smile. They wanted grace. After choosing convenience. I gave you the system, I said. What you did with it was yours. After we hung up, I felt nothing. No rush, no victory. Just stillness, like the moment after a storm passes. You don't celebrate, you just listen to what's left standing. A few days later, someone leaked the news. An anonymous blog post. Technical, detailed. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. The post outlined the failure points. The architecture Taylor had overwritten. The signature system. The exact commit that triggered the lock. Industry forums picked it up. People started asking questions, and the company's silence said more than any statement could. Marcus messaged again. You didn't burn it down. They walked into it holding a match. I started sleeping better. I hadn't realized how long I'd been carrying that tension. Even after leaving. Even after letting go. Part of me had still been waiting for closure, for understanding. And now it was clear. They didn't need to say it. I could feel it. They finally knew. I took a walk the next morning. The park was quiet, early sun, cool breeze. I sat on a bench near the fountain, watched the light shift through the trees. No laptop, no email, no systems to check. Just time, mine again. That night I wrote one last line in my notebook. If a system forgets who built it, it's not the builder who loses. Then I closed the book, left it on the shelf, and let it rest. And if you followed this far, you already know. Some stories aren't about revenge. They're about remembering. So if you're still listening, stick around. There's more I haven't told you yet. Subscribe if you want to hear how it really ends. I didn't expect the offer, at least not from them. It came 2 weeks after the leak. No subject line, just a short message. We'd like to talk. Different company, different culture, coffee. I recognized the name at the bottom. Elias Park, head of strategic AI at Rovell Capital, one of the firms that used to compete with us. Used to. Because after the collapse they started circling. We met in a quiet place. Not a conference room, not a board office. A bookstore cafe in the West Village, mid-morning. Rain outside. No one in a rush. He wore a gray sweater, no tie. Laptop still closed. Hands folded like he actually wanted to talk, not pitch. I respected that. He didn't waste time. We followed what happened, he said. I won't pretend we didn't benefit from it. But that's not why I'm here. I nodded, let him speak. You built something rare, he continued. Not just smart, but honest. It made decisions without shortcuts. We could use something like that. He paused. But only if you want to build it. Your way. From scratch, with full autonomy. I looked at him carefully, tried to read between the lines. Most people talk like that when they want control. But his voice didn't push. It offered space. What's the catch, I asked. He smiled. Only one. We don't want a product. We want a principle. That stayed with me. I took a few days to think, walked more, wrote less, reread my notebook, not for answers. Just to remember how I got here. Then I said yes. We started small. No PR, no pitch deck. Just 4 people in a rented office with good light and no buzzwords. We talked about structure, risk, ethics. What happens when an AI becomes too confident in itself and when humans let it? We didn't want something clever. We wanted something careful, curious. I designed the architecture quietly. No shortcuts this time. No compromises for speed. Every node had context. Every layer had reason. We called it hollow root. Not because it was empty, but because it didn't pretend to be whole without understanding the ground it stood on. Weeks passed, then months. Word started spreading. Investors reached out. Advisors offered lunch. Some ex-colleagues even called to check in. But we stayed quiet. Let the code speak first. One evening, I got an email. A name I hadn't seen in months. Taylor. Saw the news. Looks like you landed well. Would be good to catch up sometime. No hard feelings. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He'd been replaced quietly. Preston, too. The company was still standing, but different now. Hollow in a way they hadn't named yet. Rovell never asked for speed. They asked for clarity. We tested the model slowly, fed it edge cases, let it break gently and reassemble. It didn't try to win every time, but it never lost twice the same way. That's how I knew it was learning. Elias pulled me aside after a late demo one day. "We'll need a name soon," he said, "for the version we'll go public with." I thought about that, then said, "Call it Echo." "Echo," he repeated. I nodded, because it remembers what came before, but never repeats it exactly. Later that night, I walked home through the city. The streets were damp, quiet. I passed by my old office building, just for a moment. The lights were on, some new people inside, new projects, new promises. I didn't feel bitterness, just a quiet distance, like watching a house you used to live in. Still there, but no longer yours. I went home, poured a drink, sat by the window, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was building something that would outlive me. Not because it was big, but because it was honest. The room wasn't large, just quiet. No spotlight, no stage, just a long table, a few chairs, and a monitor on the far wall. We didn't rehearse. We didn't choreograph. We just showed them. 3 people from Ravel's board came that morning, all sharp, all quiet. The kind of people who could make or break a team with a single sentence and didn't need to raise their voices to do it. Elias welcomed them in, offered coffee, kept it casual. I stayed near the window, let the system finish booting. We weren't presenting a product. Not really. We were offering a foundation, a living core. Something that didn't predict the future but respected it. The board wanted metrics. We had some. But that's not what we led with. We led with a scenario, a market shift, an edge case. The kind of ripple that shakes confidence in systems built only for smooth seas. And we let Echo respond. It didn't flash, didn't boast. It paused, assessed, chose a path, then explained why. That part mattered most. Not the prediction, but the reasoning behind it. One of the board members leaned forward, watched the output carefully. "How did it assign risk weight that quickly?" she asked. I answered slowly, "Because it didn't assume it had enough information. It worked with what it had, then adjusted the moment new data came in." They nodded, made a few notes, didn't say much, but I saw the difference in their eyes. The way someone looks when they feel a system listening. Not just processing. After they left, Elias walked over. "You didn't say much," he said. I shrugged. I said what mattered. He nodded, then smiled. "That's the part they'll remember." That night I didn't celebrate. I didn't check numbers. Didn't scan follow-ups. I just went home, put on some music, let the silence settle. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just full of breath. In the days that followed, things moved fast. More meetings, more interest, a few carefully worded articles. But we kept the engine small, tight, disciplined. No press tour, no promise of disruption. We built like people who knew what happens when you grow too fast. When you forget why you started. Taylor reached out again. This time it was just a forwarded article. My name in the headline. A quote about Echo, something I barely remembered saying. He didn't write a message, just sent the link. I didn't open it. Not because I was angry. I wasn't. I just didn't need his voice anymore. One of our engineers, Maya, asked me something in a team sync later that week. "Do you ever think about going back?" I looked at her, then said, "No, but I remember everything." She nodded, didn't ask again. We ran Echo live for the first time at the end of that quarter. Not in a big push, no banner, no bells. Just flipped the switch quietly. Watched it hum. The model ran clean. Drift stayed low. Predictions lined up without chasing trends. More importantly, when it didn't know what to do, it said so, and that made it trustworthy. I watched it process a market signal one morning. Something subtle, barely noticeable. But Echo caught it, logged uncertainty, paused execution, then flagged a risk that hadn't fully formed yet. Not just because it was smart, but because it was allowed to hesitate. That's what made it different. Later that day, I stood by the whiteboard, alone. Some leftover notes, a few charts, and I just stared for a minute, remembering all the times I'd drawn those lines in other rooms, for other people, who only saw speed, not structure. It's strange. Sometimes the cleanest victories don't feel like wins. They feel like relief. Like something that could have gone wrong finally didn't. Not because you fought harder, but because you chose not to rush. I closed the office that night. Lights off, door locked. Echo was still running, no errors, no loops. Just steady rhythm. Like it had finally learned how to breathe on its own. There's a moment in every system when it stops moving forward. Not because it failed, but because it's waiting. For context, for clarity, for something to catch up. We call it a pause. It's easy to miss. Because everything still looks like it's working. The lights are on, the logs are logging, but nothing's changing. And sometimes, that pause isn't technical. It's personal. I felt it myself weeks after Echo went live. There was no crash, no burnout, just stillness. I would sit down, open the terminal, and do nothing. Just stare at the cursor blinking, waiting for my thoughts to start. Some days they did, some days they didn't. It didn't scare me, it just surprised me. Elias noticed first. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just started scheduling fewer meetings. No explanation. Let me drift a little. Give the system space to breathe, even if the system was me. I appreciated that. We don't always need to fix. Sometimes we just need room. I spent a few mornings walking the same 6 blocks. No destination, just movement. I'd pass the same trees. The same man with his newspaper on the bench. The same woman sweeping outside the bakery, even if the sidewalk was already clean. There's comfort in patterns, even quiet ones. One afternoon I walked into a small bookstore. The kind that doesn't advertise. That smells like paper and stillness. I wasn't looking for anything, but I found a section called Structure and Silence, a shelf of books on architecture, design, and stillness in systems. I flipped through a page that read, "Sometimes a structure survives not because it's built stronger, but because it's allowed to rest." That stayed with me. Back at the office, Echo kept running, stable, responsive, precise. Maya flagged a model run that had paused mid-cycle. Not failed, paused. She looked concerned. "I didn't code that behavior," she said. I smiled. That's the point, I told her. It knows when to wait. Echo had learned something important. To pause wasn't a weakness. It was a decision. In uncertain data environments, hesitation was protection, not confusion. It allowed the system to listen before it acted. To withhold judgment until it had earned enough confidence. Not perfect, just honest. That kind of pause is rare. Not just in AI, in people. We're taught to keep pushing, keep optimizing, fill every gap with noise or motion. But real growth doesn't happen there. It happens in the space between action and reaction. In the stillness we usually try to avoid. Maya started building new features around the pause logic. A confidence threshold. An incomplete context signal. I didn't suggest it. She saw the value on her own. That felt better than any feedback loop. The model wasn't just learning. The team was too. I watched the city change that month. Shadows got longer. People wore thicker coats. The pace slowed. The system matched that energy, not by design, by awareness. Echo wasn't chasing returns. It was reading the temperature of the world and adjusting. One night I stayed late. Not because anything was broken, just because I wanted to feel the hum of the servers again. That low, steady sound, a kind of mechanical breath, not human, but not cold either. I stood in front of the monitor and watched Echo idle. No commands running, no predictions queued, just waiting, but not asleep. Alive. I sat down and typed a note into the system log. A quiet message. For the team, for myself. Even machines need a moment to feel the wind shift. Then I logged out, and let the system keep listening. It started with a box. Maya found it while reorganizing the shared drive, buried in an old directory labeled Backup, Personal, AT, Archive. She thought it was system noise. Old logs, maybe leftover debug files. She almost deleted it, but she pinged me first. I remembered the folder. It wasn't meant to be shared, just something I kept at the edge of the project. Notes, sketches, little scripts I never finished. Fragments. I hadn't touched it in years. Forgot it even lived in that directory. But it was still there, waiting. Like a message from an earlier version of myself. I opened it that night. One file caught my eye. Logic Thoughts, VU2E, Ext. Just a plain text doc. No formatting, no headline. The first line read, "A system that only performs is a system that eventually forgets why it was built." It stopped me for a second. Not because it was clever. Because it still felt true. Most of the document was like that. Lines I wrote at 1 a.m. while solving problems I no longer remember. Reflections, questions, unfinished thoughts. A quiet conversation with no one, except me. And somehow it felt more relevant now than when I wrote it. I didn't tell the team what I found. Not right away. Some things aren't instructions. They're reminders. I read through every line, slowly, without skipping. And one sentence stayed with me more than the others. If you lose the why, the how becomes dangerous. The next morning I walked into the office early, coffee in hand, no headphones, no distractions. I sat down, opened Echo's shell, and just looked. Not to fix, not to update, just to see. See what had changed, what hadn't, where the spirit of the system still aligned with the way it started, and where it had drifted. I didn't find bugs. I found silence. The kind that comes when something's working well but is also a little too quiet. Too polished, too fast. Like it had learned how to perform, but not how to question anymore. Later that day I sat with Maya, showed her the document, told her where it came from, why I had written it. She read it in full, then looked at me. "This explains more than the code ever did." I nodded. "Yeah, it wasn't supposed to. It was just me thinking out loud." She asked if we should share it with the team. I said yes, but only if we labeled it clearly. Not a guide, not a policy. Just archive, notes from before. A few days later, the team started quoting it. In meetings, in Slack. Little lines here and there. Not as rules, but as reflections. Like someone saying, "Remember when we talked about this?" But the we was me, from another time. Something about that made me pause. Not in sadness, not in pride. Just a quiet awareness that nothing is really lost. It's just waiting to be found again. Archived, not erased. I thought about the company I left behind. The one that tried to replace me with speed. I wondered what happened to their systems, their code, their documents. Probably overwritten, buried under hotfixes, renamed, repackaged. But maybe somewhere deep in their servers, a version still lingers. Still holding on to an old pattern. A line I once wrote. A test that still runs. Even if no one knows why, there's comfort in that. Not in being remembered, but in knowing the work carries on even if your name doesn't. That weekend I printed the archive. The whole thing. Bound it, gave it a soft cover, no title. Left it on the shelf next to my old notebook. Not to read, just to keep. Because some things aren't meant to teach. They're meant to wait. For the right person, at the right time. I didn't plan to go back. But life has a way of pulling threads together. Quietly. Gradually. Until one morning you find yourself standing in front of a building you once walked away from. That's how it happened. It was Marcus who invited me. He'd taken a new role. CTO at a small firm. Growing fast, still finding their shape. He called it a clean slate with better intentions. We met for lunch. He didn't sell, didn't pitch. He just talked. Talked about the messes he inherited, the shortcuts he refused to take, the small wins that felt bigger than they looked on paper. And then near the end he asked, "Would you come in not to fix, just to listen?" I said I'd think about it. And I did, for days. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be honest with myself. The old part of me, the one that still remembered the sting of being replaced, it didn't flare up. It just sat quietly, like a healed scar. Still there, but no longer angry. I visited the office the next week. Different space, different energy. No glass walls, no branded buzzwords, just desks, whiteboards, and quiet curiosity. I walked through slowly. Let the pace match my breath, the hum of code, the low murmur of people thinking aloud. I missed that more than I realized. They weren't building something massive, just something they could trust. And that made all the difference. Marcus introduced me to the team, not as a guest, not as a legend, just as someone who had seen a few cycles, made a few mistakes, and kept showing up anyway. That felt right. We sat in a corner room with a marker-stained board. Someone pulled up a design sketch, an idea still half-formed. They asked questions. I answered slowly, only when it felt useful. There was no urgency, no hidden clock ticking beneath the conversation, only curiosity. At one point, a junior dev, Julia, asked about something I'd written years ago. A comment buried in one of the public forks of the old model. It read, "Structure isn't just rules. It's the story we trust when everything else breaks." She looked up and asked, "What did you mean by that?" I paused, then said, "Structure gives us something to fall back on. But if we don't believe in it, it's just noise." She nodded. Didn't write it down, just let it sit. That told me she understood. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that feeling. Not teaching, not leading, just sharing, quietly, letting something old become useful again. A week later, Marcus followed up. Said the team had voted. They wanted me around, even part-time, even undefined. No job title, no project list, just presence. I said yes, and so it came full circle, but not in the way I expected. Not a return, not a redo. Just a rhythm, different this time. No need to prove anything, no edge to defend. Just space, and people willing to listen. I came in twice a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. I reviewed designs, helped shape decision trees, suggested fewer lines of code instead of more. Some days I said nothing, and that silence helped more than any pull request ever could. One afternoon, someone asked me if I miss building from scratch. I thought about it, then said, "No, I don't miss building. I miss remembering why we built." They understood. I could see it in their eyes. We don't always need to start over. Sometimes we just need to pause long enough to recognize that we've already come back around. Different people, different room, same principles, and maybe that's all the full circle ever is, not a loop. Just a chance to return wiser than you left. Some things fade, some don't, and the ones that stay, they don't stay loud. They settle, sink deep, become part of you. Like memory, like rhythm, like code you can't see anymore but still runs the machine. It's been a year. Echo is still live, still learning, still pausing when it doesn't know what to say. That part matters most to me, not the success, not the numbers, but the quiet awareness. The system didn't grow louder, it grew wiser. I go in less now, not because I've lost interest, but because they don't need me in the room every time. That's how you know something was built right. When it works without the builder. When it trusts itself to stop to change to start again. Maya runs things now. Her name's on most of the commits. Mine's buried deeper old foundation work. That feels right. She sees things I missed, brings a balance I never had. One day she asked me if I wanted to update the model's name. Echo, she said, felt like a beginning, not an ending. I told her leave it, because an echo doesn't disappear. It changes shape, then returns. I still write sometimes. Late nights, quiet mornings. Not specs, not code, just thoughts. Scattered pages that no one reads but me. Sometimes they start as questions. Sometimes as memories. Most of the time they're just fragments. But they help me remember the weight of silence. The kind that builds. The kind that stays. I get messages now and then. A former client, an old friend from the first company, someone I haven't spoken to in years. They write things like, "Your system changed the way we think about risk. It's not the predictions we remember, it's the pauses." That part always gets me, because they're not thanking me for outcomes. They're remembering choices. Moments when the machine knew not to speak too soon. We don't always know what lasts, not when we're building it. Not even when we're watching it run. But sometimes years later you catch a glimpse, in a decision someone makes, in a line of code that waits instead of rushing, in the quiet trust between people who've seen enough to know what matters. That's the echo. Not volume, but persistence. There's one more line I wrote in the old archive. Didn't realize its weight at the time. The work doesn't stay with the system. It stays with the people. That's the part I'd forgotten for a while. It's easy to think success lives in output, in charts, in performance reports. But the real measure isn't what the model does. It's how it teaches us to think, to wait, to question, to care. I walked past my old office building again last week. Different company now, new logo. But the glass looked the same. The lobby echoed the same footsteps. I stood outside for a moment. Didn't go in, just listened. Not for closure, not for nostalgia. Just to feel what stayed and what didn't. When people ask what happened to me, I tell them I didn't burn anything down. I just stopped building for people who couldn't feel the weight of what we made, and started again with the ones who could. That's the story. Not a revenge tale, not really. It's a memory. A loop. A pattern that paused long enough to notice itself, and in doing so changed course. If you've been here this long, listening quietly through each step, thank you. Not everything needs to shout to be worth hearing. Some truths, the real ones, live best in silence. And if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something in your own life, then maybe the echo isn't just mine anymore. Maybe it's yours too. Subscribe if you'd like to walk through more stories like this. The quiet ones, the human ones, the ones that stay.